Good morning and good afternoon and a general hello, everyone, and welcome to Douglas Week. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today live on YouTube, but also here in our group. And a very happy Black History Month to everyone in the US joining us from the US today. I'm Dr. Caroline Dunham-Schroeder. I'm the founder of Douglas Week, and we are so delighted and really want to thank you all for tuning in today and for being with us here to join us for this wonderful event. And also joining me is my colleague and Douglas Week team member, Dr. Adrian Mulligan. Hello and good morning to you, Adrian.
Hello, Caroline. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Today is Douglas Week, day 3. The first 2 days have been very inspiring. We have thoroughly enjoyed all our events and are very happy with the turnout and the discussion. Now we're very excited that you've all joined us for another special event called Reclaiming Space and Redefining Blackness.
Yes, that's right. I'm very excited about this event. We're thrilled that our host, or your host rather, for this event is Sandrine the Hero, and she'll guide us through this important discussion. Sandrine has already been part of quite a variety of events last year for Douglas Week and again this year. So we're really happy to welcome you back, Sandrine. It's such a pleasure to have you.
And speaking of Douglas Week, we created this event series to celebrate and commemorate the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, everything he stands for, and of course, other change makers from around the world, change makers like the ones who are with us in this virtual room today. So our aim with our events is not only to commemorate the history of Frederick Douglass, his family and others, but also to discuss contemporary issues of identity, race, independence and equal rights around the world, and also to celebrate guiding concepts here at Douglas Week, like connectedness, co-creation, and collaboration, for example, at this event today. So we're delighted with today's event and what we're going to hear in a second from our contributors.
Yeah, and before I hand over to our lovely Sandrine in a second, before we begin this event, just a very few small things of housekeeping that we want to share with you. One, this event will be about an hour, maybe a little bit more, depending on the conversation. Sometimes, it's such a good flow that we keep going a little bit longer. If you're a regular Douglas Week visitor and audience member, you know that sometimes we just have to keep going. So, but approximately 1 hour. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I don't know where on your screen it will be, but if you're here on YouTube, there will be a chat box and we'll be monitoring that. So if you have any questions or want to share your thoughts, please put them in the chat box. And then we also ask everyone to be respectful to our panelists, but also to other audience members. This is a safe space. This is a conversation room, and we would welcome if everyone was very respectful to each other. So inappropriate conduct will not be tolerated, and we really thank you for being respectful to and with everyone today.
Absolutely. And for your information, this event and all our events throughout Douglas Week will be recorded. And if you miss an event, don't worry, all our events will be available here on YouTube, and you can join us live or rewatch the events during the week and afterwards. And you can find our full program for the week on our website.
Yeah, and our website is www.douglasweek.org. So very easy, go check it out. We have everything that you need to know is on there. And now I am gonna not talk anymore because I'm gonna hand over to Sandrine and her wonderful panel. So thank you all for being here. And we hope that you all, and also our audience members, that you all enjoy this next Douglas Week event. Sandrine, the stage is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to host this event. And I think whenever I think of Douglass, it's I would have done it last year, and just a profound element of just talking about contemporary issues from such an iconic figurehead. And when I was thinking about creating an event, I was thinking about the different people on social media and people which I've met who really, really inspire me. And the 3 speakers that we have now are doing incredible work, that they are the definition of change makers in Ireland, and really pushing forward the conversation of rethinking contemporary issues such as race and identity, but then also the whole concept of Black joy and education. So I'm really, really happy with the 3 panelists here. So I'll just start with Eric, if you can just introduce yourself and then I'll introduce the other two. Thank you. So just Eric.
Of course. Firstly, I'd like to thank you so much, Sandrine, for having me on the panel today. And I'd like to just extend a massive congratulations to the organizers of Douglas Week. I think it's so important that we here in Ireland celebrate the figure for what he did in regards to race, identity, and some of the themes that will be explored in today's conversation. But what he did, generally speaking, as a figurehead in so many different areas, and what he did to kind of revolutionize how we see Blackness. So my name is Eric Ahige. I'm the politics coordinator at Black and Irish. That's an organization that aims to represent the Black and Irish community. And my role is essentially to promote political education throughout the Black and Irish community, but also to advocate for the rights of the Black and Irish community too, in interaction with the political realm within Ireland. I'm a YouTuber. I'm the host of the Ericosa YouTube channel. I have my own podcast, and I'm the co-host of a podcast based on Irish politics with a friend of mine. And I also study corporate law at NUI Galway.
Thank you so much. And Aisha?
Hi, like Eric said, thank you for having us, and it's great to be part of Douglas Week this year. So my name's Aisha, and I'm co-founder of the Galpal Collective. And the Galpal Collective is basically an arts and media collective like dedicated to like the celebration, creation, and curation of works by young queer folk, people of color, and women. And I'm currently co-founder as well as the head of the visual arts team. And on top of that, I'm like a freelance creative director and director in film. So yeah, I'm all about visual arts and changing, I think, the arts and media space in Ireland as a whole, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Aisha. And then last but not least, Marcia.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks again for having me, and thank you, Sandrine, for inviting me this, and thank you to everyone at Douglas Week as well. I'm a youth coordinator for the Downey Project, which, if you're unfamiliar, is the charity that helps people in direct provision, and it's based in Ireland. And I mainly work with the youth. I work with another woman as well, and Paolo at the co-coordinators for that. And then also I run my admin of an Instagram page called The Hush Dialogue, which you might be familiar with. Again, I run that with two other women, and we just kind of talk about various things, but generally social issues that maybe haven't been given as much attention in the past as they should have been, both around things that happen globally, but also things that are very specific to the Irish context. And in my case, I'm British, so specific to the Black experiences as well. And then also besides that, I write a lot. I've written a lot on intersectional feminism and critical race. I actually have 2 essays in an anthology called The Liminal, commenting on those things. And then besides that, I'm a wrestler. So I try to intersect my work as well with like being specifically a Black woman in sport, but also just trying to make connections with other women in similar fields. So whether it's sports or things like STEM, or just anywhere that generally women of color are kind of underrepresented, and also working with other communities as well, such as like queer people of color, disabled people, and yeah, that's mainly what I do. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, so as you can see, like with the 3 speakers, they're doing phenomenal work. So we'll just begin with the conversation. And my first question is like, what's the main misconception that people have around the term Blackness? And so, Marcia, if you want to jump in first.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, this is not the only answer, but just based on my experiences, I think the biggest misconception is people think there's like one form of Blackness that everyone has to kind of subscribe to. And like in my own personal experience, I come from London. I come from like a very middle class background. Even moving to Ireland, I've retained that class identity. And people assume because of the way I speak or the access to education I've had, or like the access to generational wealth that I've had, that I'm acting white. And it's like, well, you just assume that Black people are inherently poor. That is not only racist, that's also classist. And that's not to say that like with every race, there are, you know, every class is kind of intersected with every race. So I think the main misconception is that Black people can't have wealth, they can't be middle class or upper middle class or rich, even like obviously I'm not to the extent of say like a Beyonce, but like people kind of just expect that Black people are just never going to rise up through those things. And I think it's because they always hear that like Black people have to go through several hurdles to get what you know, other people, well, specifically white people under white supremacy don't have to do. And it's like, yes, we may have to go through hurdles. I'm not saying it's valid, but it doesn't mean we can never get, you know, further along in life. And you just can't assume that there's only one way to present Blackness. And I think as well, especially in media, even when they are trying to represent, they're trying to intersect race and class, it's always one or the other. So you either see like very middle class Black people and that's it, or you see very much the working class experience of Black people. You don't really see how that intersects, because even in my life, I've got friends of very different class backgrounds and different race backgrounds, but like that's not really reflected in the media. So that's probably a main misconception that I've seen in my own experience, but also just around in media as well.
Yeah, no, and I think you've raised an important point in regards to race and class. And I think it's something like when it comes to intersectionality, it's never explored enough. And I think like when it comes to feminism, it is, but as you say, like in the different experiences of like kind of like policing the Black body and the Black experience is something definitely there, because I think when you were talking about race and class, like I'd be like completely different, like where again, like I'd come from a working class, but the fact that I'm doing a PhD, it's always such a surprise when I say it, because again, it's that misconception that like, oh, Black people are not educated, and it's like, oh, fair play for doing that, and it's like, but like I have the same opportunities as other people, and like by getting to this place, like I am in a privileged position to be there. But again, like as you say, like that, you can always just, I always just get that in the language of fair play, and then like I'd see my other friends which are doing that, and it's like, well, of course you're going to amount to a PhD. So definitely when it comes to race and class. And what about yourself, Eric?
Well, to echo what has already been said, I think one of the main misconceptions is a monolithic understanding of Blackness, as has been said. And because I'm the politics coordinator of Black and Irish, so I interact with the political fora quite regularly. I think it's quite the case within the realm of politics. Sometimes there's a singular understanding of what it means to be Black or what Blackness is. Some assumptions that are made, for example, as has been stated, is one of impoverishment, that being Black means to be poor. And here in Ireland, of course, the monolithic understanding of Blackness has been fed by stereotypes that people have interacted with. For example, the trocar box and the notorious trocar box stereotype that people refer to. So that when people see someone who is Black, the singular understanding that they impose upon that Black person is a stereotype of the trocar box. So I think this is quite problematic. And I think there's sometimes a fallacious understanding of what it means to be Black, in that people can sometimes conceptualize a sort of limited definitional boundary within which one has to operate in order for them to satisfy the criterion that they create in their mind that defines Blackness. And if you venture beyond this, as Marcia said, you might be defined as someone who's acting white. So I don't think this is fair, particularly because Blackness, it's malleable, it's incredibly malleable. It's shaped, for example, by the geographical location one is in. And Frederick Douglass, for instance, at the time he lived, Blackness was associated with degradation, poverty, inferiority. And what Douglass helped to do, he inscribed humanity in the definition of Blackness. And I think the fact that he was able to stretch Blackness and push it beyond kind of lowly expectations and stereotypes and allow it to encompass empowerment and power and forward-going movement, I think speaks to the fact that Blackness cannot be limited to arbitrary characteristics. And I think this can be quite trapping, and it's a temptation that exists within the political sphere, but also generally speaking in the culture and in conversations that occur sometimes. So I think this is probably the main misconception I can point to.
Yeah, I think everyone knows the famous trocar box, I think, and it's something that I always associated with religion, because I remember moving to Ireland. Like, I'm from Rwanda, so I remember distinctly in 2006, the trocar box was Rwanda. So the moment I moved, and it was like, and Sandrine was from that place as well. So again, all the students or anything like that, they would have had that misconception. And again, it was done something like in our local parish. So then, like, even the whole sense of community and religion, like as you were saying, Eric, were like projecting that where they could only see Black as poor and couldn't understand like how you're in like a predominantly white place like Ireland. And as you said, it is something that's very trapping, but hopefully with the different works that everyone is doing, they're stretching those boundaries, as you're saying, and like showcasing how like Blackness is multifaceted and it's always changing and it's fluid. And what about yourself, Aisha?
Honestly, I couldn't agree more with Erica and Marsha, because I think like for me, coming from more of a media background and like having like studied films and looking at like the mediascape and how we're represented in art, especially through the white gaze, And it's odd because like things you'd see in film, as in like the way like black men per se are presented, like through like the whole like gaze of violence or like hypersexualization and stuff, is then replicated in how people view black men in reality. And I think it's like definitely an issue of when like people are then like dwindled down to like characters rather than human beings. And I think that's a major issue. We lose a lot of our humanization through like the way we're put into like this monolith. And also I think like the way we're represented even like within social media and things, like I think like during the height of Black Lives Matter, when we seen like a lot of like videos of like black people like being like horribly brutalized and killed and such things like that, like it kind of became a thing of like these images were constantly being shared, that it was like this normalization of like a brutalized black body and stuff like that, that wouldn't fly for other races, or that wouldn't be as like seen as so normal. So I think like the way we are represented definitely like impacts the way that we get to like navigate the world, and the way we get to like simply like exist and like kind of just exist as human beings amongst everyone else. And I think the main thing with film and the way that like impacts like our real lives is the fact that, let's say for example, like you had the Birth of a Nation, which was an awful film, which kind of literally rebirthed the rise of the KKK due to the way that Black people were represented as these awful human beings and these awful creatures. So it's like it clearly matters how we're represented. But that being said, I wouldn't want it to then have this trope of like the perfect Black person either, because like it's either we're held at like an unbelievably low standard or like an unreachable high standard as well. Like I think there's also this thing of like everyone like should strive towards like Black excellence, which I think it's very obviously it's great to see like Black people like thrive and do amazing, but it's also like I'm a big advocate for Black mediocrity, because I'm like, we deserve to just exist sometimes and not be perfect, and that should be enough in the way we take up space as well. But yeah, that's what I would say on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really beautiful, because I know we're talking with you whenever we're talking about anything in regards to film, you're always pushing for Black joy. And I think it's something that I've never really thought about until like recently, or even myself, like getting into film, being like, yeah, why is Black people always represented in this traumatic way that I'm like, what movie have I seen that like it's just laughter, or like even a rom-com with Black people in it? And like as you say, like why can't you just exist and not be held onto the standards? Because I think we were recently like in a different event where we were talking about like the trope of the strong Black woman and what that does, and like again how that's replicated in the media and how that's replicated in real life as well. So the next question is, what are the practical steps needed to address these misconceptions? So whoever wants to jump in first.
I think it's a multifaceted approach that's required for sure. Like to Aisha's point regarding Black excellence, like if you look at the work that the likes of Aisha and Marsha are doing, for example, shining a light on marginalized communities and peoples and allowing them to come into their full expression and authentic expression, reckoning with their identity and expressing that for society to appreciate, that points to the kind of special aspect of one's identity that might go overlooked. So if you take a term like Black excellence, and you pointed to it being okay for one to be mediocre and not for one to reach high standards, I think superimposing standards on anyone is dangerous. Once you superimpose a standard like Black excellence, the next question is, well, if excellence is excellence, what does Black excellence mean? Do I have to tick any box in order for me to satisfy Black excellence? I'm trying my best to be excellent considering my idiosyncrasy. So for me to venture away from that to satisfy what I see as a particular form of excellence, it might actually deny my authentic expression of my own Blackness. And I think that can be quite dangerous. So I think culturally speaking, we have to allow, again, for that malleability in regards to Blackness, so that no one feels as if they're betraying themselves or betraying their group in authentically expressing themselves. In an African context, for example, in traditional circles, there's people, of course, from the LGBT community who feel as if they aren't appreciated within the Black mold or the African mold simply because of their sexuality. So I think superimposing a rigid kind of definitional limited structure, as stated previously, in regards to what it means to be African or what it means to be Black, can actually marginalize and ostracize a lot of people to their detriment in regards to their well-being. So I think we have to kickstart conversations about how it's okay for one to be authentically themselves and manifest that through any mode or medium they choose to. I think in terms of the wider society, it is a multifaceted issue as stated, because, for example, in regards to politics, I think within that realm, in regards to Blackness, sometimes people adopt their own ideational Blackness that's suitable within the political moment. So the Trokra box, for example, or anti-immigrant sentiment that you hear from some political representatives, sometimes they adopt that to speak to members of the population who they themselves adopt stereotypes about Black people. For example, that Black people are coming here to take our jobs and to crowd the health service and to make life harder for Native Irish people. I think to abolish that and to shatter that, we have to expand the national psyche to allow for Irish people to appreciate the fact that it is possible to be a part of the social fabric of the nation and to be Black, and to shatter the monolithic hegemonic idea of whiteness and a particular linguistic standard, a particular cultural standard being the norm in regards to what we think of when we think of an Irish person. So I think it's all about expanding the limit of what it means to be Black within cultural circles, but also beyond in regard to the society, in order for us to create a more inclusive space within which no one is subject to arbitrary expectations as a result of our limited understanding of what it means to be Black.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Eric. And I think even like building on that, it's people have a hard time with understanding something outside of like a defined concept. So like, for example, like I wrote about this in the liminal, like when people ask me, like, for example, where are you from? I say my nationality, which is British. And then I've had it from both like Black people or like white people being like, oh, but where are you really from? Well, you can't say that. It's like you're uncomfortable with the idea of someone Black being associated with something Western, which you see as like white. And like you were saying about authenticity, it's allowing us to just exist and define ourselves however we want to be. And it's not this idea that if you're Black, you can't be gay, you can't be trans, you can't be from a Western country, you can't be this, you can't be that. It's like allow me to define that. If for you, your Blackness doesn't involve those things, that is fine. That's how you understand and navigate your life as a Black person. That's okay. But for me, that's not the case. I am like, for me, I actually love duality, and I love the fact that I am both British and then like both ethnically Ghanaian, nationality-wise British. So I think it like they feed into each other. I don't feel like either of them oppose each other. If anything, I think I have a richer experience of understanding Ghanaian things and understanding British things. But also then, like when I go to Ghana and I see family members who have never left Ghana, how they have a different experience of being Ghanaian, and I love that. And then I've got like friends who are just like white and British and have never left England and probably never will. And again, they have a very different experience to me, and I find that very interesting, just because like I see this fluidity. But it's definitely about defining ourselves. And even going back to your earlier point, Aisha, about media, I think that's a problem too. Like the media loves to depict, especially when Black people aren't making things by Black people for Black people, I've noticed there's always like a very one way that they want to portray us, whether it's like Black men being like the villain or like a gangster or some sort of aggressor, or Black women either being like either hypersexualized or completely desexualized. There's never any in between. You're never just allowed to exist. And this is why something I've been trying to, like, I never actually realized this until I think Black Lives Matter kind of got revived in 2020. I just can't watch a lot of Black film. Like, it's very triggering for me. It's very distressing. I used to think I had to consume it to like learn more. And it's like, no, I can learn about that stuff in other ways that don't, you know, cause me complete stress. But also I don't want to see that to be the singular one Black story, because that's always shown. So that's something I've been trying to do, is going back and finding shows or like media that shows Black joy, or just shows like, you know, you take a setting and you put Black people in it and it's just it. So for example, like one of my favorite shows is like My Wife and Kids, which I think most Black people have around our ages have watched. And don't get me wrong, there are things about it that are problematic, but the main thing I love about it is it's just about family just going through life. It's not constantly trauma, you know, it's just them being, it's just very funny. And like, you know, that came out in 2001 and like I can still watch it in 2022. It's very, very entertaining. But yeah, I just think it's about, you know, not allowing, media definitely needs to be broadened in how we depict people. I think a lot of people may not go and read their Du Bois or their Lord or their like bell hooks, but they will watch a TV show, they will watch a movie. And if all we're getting from this media is just like one way of thinking, it's not going to help. And it comes as not just having Black people on screen, but Black people behind the scenes, being directors, being writers, really just being involved. Then take it to other industries as well. Like, you know, again, in wrestling, you have look, usually you'll just see like a wrestler, but like to make a match, you have, some people call it an agent or a producer, but you have someone who, like the wrestlers will work on the match, they'll speak to someone else who'll give them other helping points. You'll have a team called like creative, where they'll like give a story as to why you're fighting. And it's about having Black people involved in every single one of those processes, because that's the only way you're really going to change the perceptions of race. And also, I think, like you said, it's just about having so much joy. Like, we are not all just trauma. Like, no one is just trauma, and we shouldn't just be defined by that, especially if we're not defining it for ourselves. I love seeing Black people happy. Other people need to see Black people happy. And I think, like you said, Eric, it does humanize us once you start seeing that we have a plethora of experiences and not just this one experience that is depicted through society and the media.
Yeah, I couldn't I feel like we're gonna all be saying I couldn't agree with you more, but I couldn't actually agree with you guys more. I definitely think like in terms of like steps to take, I think like it's kind of that thing of like broadening like representation like in front of and behind the camera, especially for me as a filmmaker. I think that's like one thing I'm like constantly advocating for, and like having like the power to like control your own narrative. And I think like even with GalPa, like a big conversation that like always comes up for us, and when it comes to things like discussing race or like sexism or like queerphobia and stuff, is that like we're always kind of a bit like hesitant to do it, because we're like, oh, we keep getting boxed into kind of that thing of like, oh, because you guys are a group that kind of like focus, like that have like people from marginalized backgrounds, you have to like talk about your trauma. And I think for me, like at least like in 2020, like it got to a certain point where I was like, I can't keep talking about like, you know, Black trauma. I can't keep making things about Black trauma, that I wanted to like make things that like more like encapsulated like Black joy, or like encapsulated other things that I was like, I found like interesting, other things that I found really fascinating, or like, because I know like I'm a big like massive rom-com fan and stuff like that. And that's kind of what I wanted to incorporate more in my work and things like that. And I always thought like, and I think like sometimes there is a pressure as a Black person with any sort of like platform, whether big or small, that you need to kind of constantly be like speaking for like the cause or something. But like the onus isn't on that. The onus isn't on us to do that all the time, because we are like multifaceted like human beings, and we can like speak about anything, and we should be allowed to speak about anything we want to talk about. We should be allowed to like express ourselves in all these different ways and express our views on all these different things. Like, for example, with Eric being like the political coordinator for Black and Irish, like I remember actually listening to like one of Eric's like podcast episodes, and I was like, damn, it's actually really refreshing like to like hear him talking about like all these other things like outside the scope of race as well. It's just kind of like that capability that we have to like talk about things outside of our racial experience. And because I think like for the most part we were so dwindled down to that for in so many aspects of life, that like I don't know, it's constantly that thing of that, like when people talk about me, it'll be like, oh, like I'm so proud of being Black. I'm so happy to be Black. And I think everyone here is very happy to be Black. But it's always that thing of like, Aisha's like a great like Black director and stuff. And it always irks me a little. I'm like, why didn't you just say great director? Why did we have to like throw that in there? Because it's almost that thing of kind of like, oh, like she's great despite the fact she's Black. I'm like, no, like those things like come hand in hand. Like my experience as a Black person like has informed my work, I think, in like a greatly positive way. And another thing is with that, I think that, oh my gosh, my words. Another thing with that, I think, is just that like I think there's so much power in like storytelling as well. Like I think there's so much power in storytelling because we're constantly telling stories, whether it be like casually or like formally, like on the big screen, or just like in conversation to our friends. And I think the power of language within storytelling is really important. Is the way like that we talk about Black people, or the way we hear Black people spoken about as well, is really key. Because like sometimes you'll hear people like use certain words and they might not mean it in a bad way, but like the way like I remember like in secondary school I was called articulate a lot. Like it'd be like a shock that like, oh my God, Aisha, you're so articulate. And at first I was like, oh, that's kind of nice. And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, what do you mean by that? I was like, what about me screams that I shouldn't be articulate in the first place? And it was always like this surprise that like, let's say I'm from like, because I'm working class myself, and it'd be like kind of surprised that like, oh, like you're going to art school and like, you know, you speak in a certain way, but like you're working class and Black, like things aren't matching up. And it's that thing of that like, Dave, you're gonna have to like open your mind like beyond like a Tyler Perry movie. This is real life right here. Like and I think another thing is with being like Afropean as well, we don't have as much representation on screen because a lot of our media with when it comes to like the Black experience is informed by like Black American media, which is great at the same time because like there's so much history there. But I think as Irish people, we also become sort of neglectful of like the Black and Irish history here, which is kind of like why I kind of like really appreciate what Black and Irish do as well when they highlight the stories of like Black people today and kind of like they put an emphasis on like Black and Irish history and show how like that is very much in existence. Because I've got like cousins in Texas, and like when I said I was from like Ireland, they were like, what do you mean? they're like, that doesn't make sense. They're like, there's Black people in Ireland. And I'm still having that conversation with the fact that like I was born here and people are like, that's crazy. And I'm like, it's just broadening the whole like scope of Blackness and like broadening out to like being like African and European and broadening out to be like African and British and broadening out to be like literally just like anything beyond what they could like think capable of that we haven't seen on screen or that we haven't seen in TV shows, because like it's gonna like take time for that stuff to like catch up, because at least in Ireland I feel like we're kind of like getting to that first generation, especially of like creatives, because I think like in Britain they've kind of got more of an established like Black and creative industry. In comparison to Ireland, we're kind of like only really starting out, which is crazy because it doesn't feel like it, but anytime I think about it, I was like, wow, like we're actually like kind of like the first generation of like Black people who kind of got to like explore more outside of that, because we didn't have like kind of like, because as first generation, a lot of us are first generation immigrant kids and stuff like that. So it's kind of like that thing of that you get to like build your own path a bit more. But yeah, I hope that answered the question. I feel like I just go on tangents.
No, it did. And I think like, as you were saying, it made me very excited in regards to like, yeah, we are the generation which are really, really changing the conversation. Because like, as you said, yeah, like there's no clear way of like even looking at like the Black Irish experience, especially like even when it comes to like racial discourse or critical race thinking. Like it's very like American or English. Like we haven't really found a language yet to kind of describe the different, like what it means to live in Ireland with a dual identity. And I think, I know like for me, like I'm a big nerd like when it comes to writing, so like for me, like that's where I've been really like trying to like write book chapters about it, so then like it's there being like, yeah, we've existed, we're here, and we're changing that conversation. Because I really like, it goes back to like what Eric was saying, like the fact that there's still this pushback when it comes to like Irish national identity, that you can't be Black and Irish. It's, you know, because like I know for myself, like it's a very frustrating thing, because like I've been in Ireland since 2006, but my little brothers are born here, and so they're still going through that, where people are like, but where are you actually from? And they're like, Carlow. And that's where they stop. And again, like it makes me wonder like how many more years, like when will it stop like being asked like, where are you actually from? Because I think it's something that I only ever really experienced in Ireland. Like if when I was on Erasmus in France or anything, if I was like, oh yeah, do you know, I'm Rundee's Irish, it was like, cool. But in Ireland, it's like, no, you're not. Like, where are you really from? So again, like but we are changing that conversation, definitely. And so with the next question then is, through your respective work or project, what ways are you redefining Blackness?
I think for me, like, it just like, this could be like a very like brazen answer, but I think for me, it's just kind of like existing. Like, I think like it's so weird because it's just kind of like, just by like existing and like presenting yourself as your authentic self to the best of your ability, because that's hard enough to do already just as like a human being. But like I think just you're existing as a Black person and existing like authentically and unapologetically, shout out to Sandrine Mag, unapologetic by existing like authentically and unapologetically, you are then redefining Blackness as to whatever you want it to be. And I think for me, the way that comes across in my work, I think like the last thing I did was like was a music video for like a bedroom pop artist, Baby Blue, and like my whole focus on that was kind of like just like it was really weird because like the whole thing's weird because we had like this like fake garden, a bunch of like heads and clouds, and like the whole premise is that like she's like searching for this boy who she matched with on like a dating app, and like it's all very goofy and like bright and fun colors, and I was like, oh, I love this. And like the whole cast of that was Black as well, and like I got so many messages like, oh my god, like we never see stuff like this like for like Black women or like for Black girls in the media. Like they never get to be like goofy or like silly and just like be in like this hyper like feminine space as well. So I think like just stuff like that, like just like existing authentically. And that also being said, I also think like there is like importance in telling stories that do deal with Black trauma, but like personally I can't do it. Like personally I can't do it. Like I don't have it in me anymore. Like I've reached my limit, I've almost reached my limit. I'm getting there. I'm almost reached my limit. I've got like one project left in me, then you won't hear me say the words racism ever again in my life. Like but yeah, I think just like existing authentically and like unapologetically and just doing what feels right for you, because I'm always like very wary of being like, oh, like this is what I do to like, you know, express my Blackness, because I'm like, no, that's just what I do to like express myself, you know, because it's just kind of like, that's because we're all so different as people that it's so hard to like pin it down to like this. Obviously there's some things that like culturally we all might like relate to, because like there's like, by culturally I mean even like small things, because I go to like a predominantly like white institution like in college and stuff. Like sometimes I'll be like with my white friends and the rest of my Black friends, and like I'll start running when like a really funny joke is told, but my white friends don't do that, but my Black friends, so it's like small stuff like that I'm like maybe culturally, but besides that, like it's just about expressing yourself and just showing up as who you are.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that. And I think I'm trying to do it in two ways in my work. Firstly, this is like a personal thing, and I kind of invite everyone to do this, not because I think it's the one way, but I find it to be super helpful, is to not live in reaction to the systemic oppression. And by that, I mean, like, I don't wake up and be like, cool, how am I going to piss off white supremacists? To be quite honest, I don't care. Like, I just don't care what white supremacists think. I don't care what raging misogynists think. I don't care what specifically raging white supremacist, misogynoir people think, just because I think it's, when I was young and I was like trying to get involved in stuff, it was always like, you know, do the thing they don't want you to do, but it's like, but you're still being controlled by them that way. If you're trying to get a negative reaction, you aren't really doing anything for yourself. So like what I try and do now is however I'm behaving, no matter the sphere, that it's same whether it's like personal, public, private, blah, blah, I just try to be like, what do I actually want to do? Where are my boundaries? Where do I feel comfortable with? Like, what do I feel comfortable with? And if what I'm doing is going to piss off like racists and like white supremacists, cool. Like, and, you know, misogynist, I'd like fine, but like, that's not my intention for anything. The same way if it doesn't anger them, which is kind of like, I can't imagine anything I'm doing that doesn't anger them because I want these suppressive systems torn down. But like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really care about that reaction. I find that to be very freeing because now I'm just doing things for myself. And, you know, understanding as well, like my way isn't the only way. So this may be how I'm trying to express my experience as a Black woman, as, you know, the multitude of other Black facets of my identity. You know, and it's just like what works for me. It doesn't have to be about in reaction to someone else. And again, it doesn't mean that I don't call out like, you know, bigoted behavior or like what bigoted people are doing. Absolutely not. It just means that like my life doesn't revolve around that. And I think as well that helps to expand and redefine Blackness, because like we were saying, it's so related to trauma, or like specifically as a Black woman, being that strong, independent Black woman who just like, you know, is ready to take on the world. And it's like, actually, you know, like if I don't want to say something about this, I don't have to. Maybe that's where your work as an ally comes in. Or, you know what, I actually do feel quite strongly about this. I've got things to say for my own personal catharsis. I need to let this out of my system. So I'm going to say something. But like, if it's not cathartic for me, sometimes I just disengage. Like, for example, recently with the Joe Rogan stuff, I have no business entertaining anyone who's a grown adult saying the N-word. I don't have to engage with that stuff. I saw it and I was like, nope, not for me. I don't need to be distressed today. I can, you know, watch something and talk to my friends and, you know, just live my life and be happy. And then the second way I'm trying to do this now, I haven't started it yet, but I'd love to go back to college and actually, or maybe not even necessarily through the education system, but definitely through research. What I want to do is work on body image and like eating disorders and body dysmorphia, because a lot of that treatment is rooted in the history of white women and white girls, and they don't really account for the experiences of women of color, specifically Black women, because something that like maybe you guys will be familiar with, but I know it definitely was the case living in England, is like growing up in the 2000s, the idea was to be like very, very skinny and very, very pale, like very white. And then somehow in the 2010s, it got flipped and it was like, oh, you can have like an hourglass figure, you can have big boobs, big butts. And again, even saying big is like in relation to white women, constantly we're defined in relation to white women, but we don't exist. We shouldn't have to be defined in them because we were not put on this planet to be in relation to white women. But like, again, lack of language. I'm trying to find better words. When I have better words, I will publish it, don't worry. But like how do you expect Black women and Black girls to have good like self-esteem if for like 10, 20 years of their life they've been told they're ugly for the way they look, and then you flip the script later on with no warning sign and be like, oh, you only look good now because white women have appropriated how you look, but you should be happy that we've even allowed you to like be better. Like, again, I'm not saying it very well, but I've been thinking about that with my own experiences growing up, and I know a lot of friends of mine who are Black or like biracial Black have had those experiences too, and I was like, more needs to be said about this, because it all comes under the policing of Black women's bodies. And I just think we haven't given it, society hasn't given enough attention to it. I would love to do some more work on it. And so it's very much in the infancy stages, but I think that's another way of redefining it too. It's like, you know, you can't just say that certain illnesses are only for this race of people, like anything can affect anyone. And it's again, us being left out of the conversation has meant that like so many other Black women, Black girls, or even like, you know, Black men as well, and like Black non-binary people, they probably would have had body image issues too. And they've been very much left out of the conversation, particularly again, if you are non-binary, like only recently have people even started bringing that to the mainstream, which isn't helpful. And then also as well, like people are expecting that if you're a man, you don't have body image issues. And it's like, well, anyone can. So that's something I'm trying to redefine now. Maybe that seems a bit negative and traumatic, but I think it's definitely an area where we need help in. So if I can do that, I think that'd be really, really great.
To echo what has already been said very eloquently by the two ladies, I think the first thing I try to do is to live proactively and authentically. So if you look at Douglas, for instance, he was a slave, but he was an amazing orator, and his oratorical skills allowed him to climb to the top of the political and diplomatic scene and to make an impact in that regard. And he interacted with figures like Abraham Lincoln. He built bonds with figures like Daniel O'Connell to address slavery within the United States of America. And as stated previously, as a result of him authentically being himself, he inscribed humanity into Blackness. So Blackness couldn't be relegated to the state of being a slave, or the state of being inferior, or the state of being oppressed. You could be a fantastic diplomat and politician and writer, author, a speaker, public speaker, and be Black. So by authentically being himself and embracing his talents and his multifaceted identitarian framework, there was another layer added conceptually in the public mind to what it meant to be Black. So in being yourself, Aisha and Marsha, and you too, Sandrine, you're allowing people here in Ireland to see Black people in a particular position and therefore believe in themselves in regards to possibly pursuing the place that you're in. And I think in doing that, you're redefining Blackness simply by authentically and proactively being yourself. As Marsha said, not living in reaction to anything, because then you're limited. Then the manacle of reactionary thoughts and actions are around you. And I don't think that's any kind of fruitful type of way to live. So by trying to be myself, and it requires introspection, asking yourself, who am I and what do I want? And trying your very hardest not to acknowledge what you think other people culturally expect from you, be it people who impose negative stereotypes on you, or be it your African family who have a particular conceptualization of what it means to be Black and African. So this is something that I'm attempting. Secondly, conversation, conversing with brilliant people from the Black community and beyond about life, about living, about this topic also, the kind of limitations of an ostensible understanding of Blackness. I think conversing about it can really lead people to ask questions to themselves about whether they're living in reaction, whether they're trying to live to conform, or whether they're trying to live to be and to, as Aisha said, authentically exist, because that requires courage and bravery. And I think in doing so, just in doing so, it sounds simple, but it's very difficult for the individual. I think that's what leads to the expansion of the definitional limits that we've all alluded to throughout this conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that was beautiful. I think the main concept of it is being your authentic self. And definitely, as Aisha had said, that's why like the name Unapologetic came. I was very sick of having to be like, okay, am I Black enough, or am I acting white for this and stuff like that, having a dual identity and coming from like a different from a Rwandese background. And I think I think like the last 2 years, like when I just stopped listening to other people and like really, like as you say, like decided to be like, okay, like I'm happy writing and I'm happy like getting into film or anything like that, and just talking about whatever I want to talk about. Because I think one of the misconceptions, I think when people meet me, they're like, oh, you're actually more fun, because I think online I'm so serious. And like I think they're like, oh, she's always complaining about something, and then it's like I'm there like writing about Love Island. It's like, yeah, I can complain about racism 1 minute, but I'm still like a normal human being who's watching reality TV shows and stuff like that. So definitely, like with what we've all said, it's just authentically living. And like I think, Eric, you raised a really important point in talking to other Black people and just seeing like their way of understanding, because definitely like it's helped me in being like, okay, so like I would have grown up like in Carroll, which was a very small county, and again, like even like there wouldn't have been other Rwandese family, but like by being online and talking to different people, and like as I said, like Black joy is a term that I heard from Aisha, where I was like, oh my God, every time I watch a rom-com now, I'm like, what am I watching it for? And stuff like that. Like, are there Black people portrayed in this? And what does that mean? So it is really, really important to engage in this conversation, and yeah, just to really pick just living authentically by yourself, and again just doing things that only make you happy, as opposed to being like, okay, so I'm a strong Black woman, I'm gonna always continuously fight for this. Just be like, no, you can take a day off as well. So the next part then kind of goes into reclaiming space, which I think all of you are doing, because like in Ireland, like it's predominantly white, so a lot of different, whether or not it be media, TV, or and even like with what you're saying, Eric, with politics is still predominantly white. So I want to just for you to explain to the audience, like what does it mean for you through like your respective works? What does it mean to reclaim these spaces? So whoever wants to go first.
For me, what it means, I generally speaking, I think with the gradual expansion of the idea of being Irish, and that expansion allowing itself to encompass Black people and people who are from Eastern Europe, people who are migrants, people who sometimes are prohibited from the mantle of Irishness. I think as that occurs, people are then, they gain self-confidence in relationship to their Irishness, and that allows for them to see themselves as stakeholders within the Irish society. I think one of the reasons why voter turnout amongst the Black community, and this is anecdotal because I don't think there's any official data on this, is quite low, is because a lot of people don't appreciate the stake they have within Irish politics. They don't see themselves as being fully Irish, and therefore they don't see Irish politics as something that is fully concerning them. So I think as we expand that definition, we can empower people to think more confidently about themselves in a relationship to Irishness and their responsibility to participate in Irish life authentically as themselves. So reclaiming space for me means promoting self-empowerment and self-confidence in regards to communities here that is sometimes ostracized and neglected when we think of what it means to be Irish, and empowering them to authentically interact with Irish society, be that in politics or in media and art and storytelling or in writing. And in the case of politics, I really think for this to occur, and I want to use this opportunity to emphasize it, the community needs to, we need to get the community registering to vote. It's one of the key points on my own kind of remit that I want to work at. I want to, and from in conversation with a lot of Black Irish people, it seems again as if they're not interested in registering because they're not interested in Irish politics because they don't think Irish politics is interested in them. And I think that might be the case because the political agenda implicitly does not appreciate the need to encompass Black Irish people in regards to doing Irish political work. And I think, again, this aligns with the expansion of the idea of being Irish. So this is what I think in a political sense it means to reclaim space, to empower people to vote and to see themselves as being stakeholders in the Irish society and therefore in the arena of Irish politics or whatever other sphere or fora in question.
Yeah, I think this actually highlights what you said, Eric, highlights a key difference between like the Black American experiences, Black British experiences, Black Irish experiences. And this is why sometimes it's hard that there isn't enough stuff kind of focusing on the different types of Blackness among, even in the Western world, because like you think back to the election of like 2020, the most recent one in 2020, you know, what do they say? Black people came out in America and it's like, you know, Black women did this, Black people did that, they went to vote, Black people do anything to vote. And it's like, yeah, of course they would, because like they've had a completely different experience, like you said, like Black Irish people who are at the point where like they feel like they're not included, like politics doesn't reflect them and their needs, and they still kind of feel on the outs. Whereas like, yeah, you think about other countries, like both America and like Britain have had an immigration influx that's happened much earlier. And then also neither of those countries, well, America technically is also was a colonizer. Basically, what I'm trying to say is the island's still like a post-colonial country, and it's still quite even early on in its own independence. So like, obviously, I'm not excusing these things. They shouldn't include, you know, people from different backgrounds. But like you said, they are having this time to kind of expand what does it mean to be Irish. And then in terms of reclaiming space, it kind of thinks to me personally, like we're going back to that question of like, where are you really from? Again, not trying to do this in reaction to anything, but it's almost like an act of defiance to be like, no, I'm going to enjoy my duality because you want me to be singular. You want me to be a monolith to fit your agenda, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to define for myself. And if you don't like it, this is my boundary. You don't have to be involved in my life. And that's something I think is the biggest thing for me, is learning what boundaries are and, you know, not yielding from them in relation to get a relationship from someone. Again, not even necessarily on a racial perspective, but in any perspective, you know, like if I have a boundary and like this is what makes me feel comfortable or doesn't makes me feel uncomfortable, if someone doesn't want to work with that, they don't have to be in my life. And it's going to be a detriment for me to, you know, kind of allow them when I'm already feeling uncomfortable. And again, I think that comes from like a lot of introspection, which I'm very fortunate to have had through like years of therapy. And just, you know, I think also just kind of being a Black woman, you're constantly thinking about how, okay, this is how I see myself. This is how this community sees me. This is how that community sees me. I really see me as this. So how do I navigate through this space? I think that's like, I don't think anyone should have to go through that, but it has given me a lot of introspection. So I think the way to reclaim it is just kind of knowing your boundaries. And again, as well as we said, like being authentic, I think just not feeling like you don't deserve those things, like you deserve everything, like you deserve joy, whatever. And yeah, just really think about your boundaries and what you're comfortable with, and again, who you can let into your life at what level. So like this kind of was emphasized with the height of I guess the revival of Black Lives Matter in 2020. I'm at a point where if I'm going to have an intimate relationship with someone, by intimate I mean like a friend or like a romantic partner or whatever it is, they need to come knowing a certain like amount. There needs to be a certain level of anti-bigotry, in my opinion, particularly around the things that are like that marginalize me, just because it's not safe for me to be with someone who is going to let a racist comment be directed at me and just like not do anything about it. Or if we're in a shop and I'm being followed, you're going to gaslight me knowingly or unknowingly, being like, oh, I'm sure they just do that to everyone, you're just imagining. That's not safe for me to be around. And for me, that's a way to reclaim space and just to be like, actually, you're not safe for me to be around. This is making me feel this way. I don't feel like I have support in you, so I'm not going to have an intimate relationship with you just because it's not good for me. And like, I think in the past, I would have thought I had to, or maybe circumstantially, because like, be it in school or in work or whatever, I just kind of had to like push that aside. And it's like, actually, no, you deserve to have your feelings be centered and like take up space here. And I find it a lot more like refreshing now. Like, again, everyone who isn't I have an intimate relationship in my life is very good around that stuff. I never have to feel unsafe or worry or even having these discussions. I can have these discussions and not worried they're going to get defensive or be like, can we just talk about something else and be dismissive? I can actually learn from like, you know, we can have great discussions. And then again, the flip side as well, friends of mine who have other marginalizations that I don't have, I'm glad that I hold that space for them too, and that we can have those discussions. And me as like, for example, a straight person, I'm not defensive towards them, or I don't feel uncomfortable. If I ever am feeling uncomfortable, I'm like, what's going on here? This is like some learned homophobia that you need to unlearn. So how about we do that internal work and we don't put it on to someone else? And yeah, I just think it allows for, because for me in an ideal world, like being equitable and equal is that we're all centered and it's not just certain groups that are. So I think this is a way for like taking up space and allowing communities as well to start doing that even before it maybe becomes wider.
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to like reclaiming like space in Ireland, it's that like weird thing of kind of like what Marsha was saying, that like I think like because of Ireland's history, like they only kind of like reclaimed their own Irish identity as well. And then like obviously once again, like not excusing it, but then to let like kind of outsiders or something into that definition that they've only so recently got. And I don't think it's talked about enough, that like kind of like there's this new idea of being Irish, even though the idea of being Irish is so new in the first place, that like when you show up and like you threaten that, a lot of people are kind of scared because of that colonial kind of like history Ireland has. And I think that's why it's kind of like really like unique from like from the UK and from like not from the UK, from Britain and from I'm going to say from England because I'm just gonna say from England and from America. And I think that like with Galpal especially, I think like because we're kind of like a separate almost like entity to kind of the more like established like Irish spaces that would be more predominantly white or predominantly male, or like not have as many like queer people there. It's kind of that thing of that, like obviously we hope that we can get to a point where we won't need spaces like Galpal to like work anymore. We won't need spaces of Galpal to like show like to have our work recognized and stuff. But I feel like at the moment now, because a lot of people are like, I know I get the question like, oh, like why isn't like Galpal for everyone? I was like, that's because other spaces aren't for everyone, but like you've kind of gotten so used to seeing them as what they are that it's become the norm to you that when someone then creates their own space, that it's like, oh my gosh, like that's so wrong. But I'm like, well, what do you want us to do? Like, what do you want us to do? I was like, either way, I'm gonna have to make my little movies somewhere. I don't know. But I definitely think it's that case of that, like you do kind of want to get to a point where like things are so integrated and so like kind of like not mixed in together, because obviously I don't want to ever erase the idea of being like Black and Irish, or like kind of have Irishness under like a monolith or like a homogenous kind of label, but definitely one where we can like coexist with our own differences and our own identities and like cultural differences as well. But I think like at the moment, I think it's kind of like being like with the stage Ireland is at right now, I think it's like being unafraid to say like, okay, this is a space for queer people, or this is a space for Black people to like express what they're feeling in like a, and I'm very like wary of using like the term like safe space, because I know it's such very like I don't know, artsy girl liberal or whatever, but I'm like, anyways, but kind of creating like a safe space for people to like kind of like create their own work without like that fear of that like the lashback of like of like experiencing like some sort of racism or some sort of sexism as well, because like it's hard enough, I think, kind of like existing in the workplace rather than having these all like unconscious like biases against you as well. So I think like obviously there's a lot of things like diversity training, and that's kind of getting rolled out a lot in Ireland at the moment, but I think like definitely like it's important for like marginalized communities to have their own space to like speak on their issues together, and to kind of like bring it and have that sense of relatability as well, and to have that space where they feel like, okay, I can like express myself fully, and I don't need to like, you know, filter my experience as well. And I think like in terms of like the way people experience like Blackness in Ireland is like hugely different, obviously, because like the even just like, because I have an older brother, and the way he would have experienced like being Black in Ireland, and even though we come from like the same place, same household, just from him like being like maybe like a different gender and a different literally just a different gender, everyone else is not really different, or a different like sexuality or something, that like he would have experienced the world as a Black person very differently than I would have experienced the world as a Black person. But I think like coming back and almost like comparing notes and stuff in a space where you feel free to do so, and where also you don't feel like, I think like another big thing, and Rasha kind of touched on it, is like when you do want to speak on your experiences, but that will then make someone else uncomfortable who doesn't understand where you're coming from, or like you don't want to like, or I know for me, like especially in 2020, I was definitely someone who would be very careful with the way I spoke about racism to white people, in a way that I would center their feelings, and like I would prioritize their feelings and their kind of reactions, because like I didn't want to come across as like an angry Black woman, and I didn't want to like, you know, like alienate them from like the conversations either. But I have gotten to a point now, not that I don't care like how somebody else would feel, because sometimes these topics are quite triggering and they are quite heavy, but I was like, okay, if I'm the one who's being affected, then like my feelings will take priority. And I think it's easier to then do that in a space of kind of people with similar experiences to you, to then kind of then go not battle that out, that's so dramatic, but like to go out into the wider world and like talk about your experiences, and to be able to like call things out in like your own way as well. Because I think like as like Black people, we're also expected to like kind of like it's very hard for us to like to show anger. Like I've said this before, like I don't have the luxury of anger sometimes because I know that will affect me in the way I'm seen in like my line of work. But like I've seen like other people who wouldn't have the same background as me or the same like ethnic identity as me, who can be like as angry and as loud as they want, and it'll be like, wow, he's so passionate. I'm like, must be nice. I'm like, it must be nice. I was like, oh. So anyways, yeah, I think that's why there's that important thing of like having a space for yourself, but also kind of like being obviously doing the obvious thing that like at the end of the day, like you will need to break into these wider, more established spaces for longevity. But I think it's very important to also build up spaces that center marginalized people from the ground up that are like owned by marginalized people as well. I think is super important. And because I feel like ownership over like this kind of comes with ownership over your narrative and ownership over like the way you're presented as well. It's super important that you have like, let's say for example, Black people behind that, like Black people telling Black stories, or like Black people getting to like curate Black work and stuff like that. I think is very important.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with what all of you have said, and especially just with the last sentence you say there, Aisha, in ownership of your own narrative, because I think that's everything that I do, like where you have to centralize people's experiences. Because I always find like when it comes to Irish discourses, you know, you'd have politicians or those in power talking about, oh yes, like the life of migrant women or this and that, but like that's not them, like they don't have those firsthand experience. And I think it's always a very powerful thing just reading the works or just attending a talk, anything like that, run by migrants or marginalized communities, talking about their lived experiences, but like navigating what they want to talk about. Like I've gone to different like talks or anything like that, like where it's run by Black people, but like racism isn't brought up, and I'm like, yeah, because that's not all we talk about. So it is really, really important. But I think like just with all the different works that the three of you are doing, it gives me so much hope and like and joy in regards to like the future of Ireland, because I always believe like we just need to reclaim as many spaces as we can, as opposed to being like, okay, it's just unapologetic and no gal pal, like dude, like it's unapologetic gal pal, the hush dialogue with Eric's YouTube videos, which are like, again, like he just asks question, which I think about, but I'm not brave enough yet to ask. So like there's someone there that's already doing that work, and I think it's really, really important to like encourage young people and just because I just think like our generation, well, like I'd be older than most of you, but like with me anyways, like I think like when it comes to my little brothers, which are 15, I'm so excited for them to be like to see all the different spaces that they can go into, and that they don't have to like, they won't be walking into a room and like they're hyper aware of the Blackness and what way they have to act. Like there will be different safe spaces there that they can go into. And again, if they want to go into creative element, I'm like, yeah, there's a director there called Aisha, like I'll hit you up with that. Or if they want to go into politics, Eric is there with our next T-Shot, you know, like it's just amazing there, where like that's really what like makes me happy about like just the different works that we do. Like it's a lot of pressure, because again, like we're kind of the first people doing it, but I think the fact that like we're in every single different, and like again, whether or not it be literature or the art or politics, like we're there making a difference, and it will make a difference for younger people. So that leads into like my last question in regard to just any young person watching this, and like what advice would you have for young people who are coming to terms with their identity and understanding like how to just navigate different social discourses? So just through the works that you've done, like what advice would you have for them? So whoever just wants to go first.
I'm very sympathetic to young people at this time, particularly young Black, Irish people. I understand that a lot is being thrown at them, and that's amplified by social media or the TV and so many different sources. Where, when you're young, you're very susceptible, you're very vulnerable to influence. And I know I use the term malleability in regards to identity, but being young makes you very malleable. You're like Play-Doh. You're formless in a sense, and through the kind of your experience with the vicissitudes of life and the positive aspects of life too, your shape takes form. So I understand that for a lot of Black Irish young people, their immediate access to representations of Blackness can sometimes shape what they think it means to be Black in their mind. be it their phone, what they see on TikTok or social media, or be it who they see in their like immediate community or environment. So to them, I would encourage them to, because again, it's an act of bravery for anyone throughout their life at any stage to be themselves, because there are very strong incentives not to. But I think it's particularly the case when you're young. And I know from my experience, for example, growing up in the environment I did in Longford Town, the greatest town in Ireland, I was around a lot of, even like Aisha, for example, is doing a project right now on a topic. And part of that topic is masculinity. And I answered some questions for her in regards to masculinity and how I see myself in relation to masculinity. And I was thinking about my experiences growing up. And I understand that when it came to being a man in my mind, every single factor related to being a man was related to men in my immediate environment. And I grew up in a single mother household in a working class environment. So there was a lot of positive representations of masculinity, but a lot of negative representations of masculinity too. Things that we now define as toxically masculine. And this in my mind was what it meant to be a man in a sense. So when it comes to navigating life and shaping your identity as a Black Irish person, sometimes people's immediate access to Blackness can shape what Blackness means in their mind. So I'd encourage expansive thinking from young people, but more importantly, time with yourself. Don't be afraid to ask yourself what you truly want and what you want to do and what you want to pursue. And once you have an idea of what that is, use the revolutionary device and technology that we have available to us to find out more about that thing. The internet, I think, would have been a dream to Irish people 100 years ago. It would have been juju to some tribes in Nigeria 200 years ago if you showed it to them. It'd be a signal of the coming of Christ in middle-aged Europe not too long ago. So we have mediums through which you can delve deeply into topics that you're fascinated by, but you have to arrive at those topics through asking yourself what you want and being deep in your questioning, and then turn to a source like the internet to find what it is you want to find in relationship to that topic. Don't let it be the inverse way. Don't go to the internet first to find out who you are. Rather, ask yourself questions and be with yourself, be present with yourself before you turn to those technologies and your friends, and your mother and your father, your aunties, your uncles, people in your immediate community, your teachers, to talk to them about what you want to pursue and who you think you are. So this would be the advice I give to young people, but also to believe in yourself and to understand that you possess unfathomable potential that you can't even imagine right now. So this is what I'd say to young people.
Yeah, that was great. Kind of links into what I would say too, because there are two major things I'd kind of say to young people. First of all, I said it before and I'll keep saying it: boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Learn what a boundary is, because I don't know about you guys, but I was never taught about boundaries. It wasn't until I went to therapy at 19 that my therapist was like, okay, because the boundary's been violated. And I was like, what's a boundary? And then I got a book and I did so much reading on it, but so many like violations had happened to me because people weren't respecting my boundaries. But also I didn't know how to articulate my boundaries. I think it's very hard to describe something. You don't have the language to do it. And granted, like every language is confined to the limitations of itself. But like, I think the more we try and expand language, the more we try and rethink of words and ways, or even just rethink ways to describe our experience. Like, you know, just because someone said this is what happened to you, it doesn't mean that's the only way that it happened. We have to think, okay, no, how did I perceive the situation? What happened to me? How am I feeling? And like you were saying, Eric, like really sitting down with yourself. And I think also building self-trust. And I think it's very hard, obviously, when you are a marginalized person, because the systems at play don't allow for you to, you know, well, they oppress you essentially, and they tell stuff to you from their perspective, and a lot of that involves gaslighting, and you're not even aware you're being gaslit. It's just maybe you'll be in an instance where, for example, someone could be saying something racist to you and you say, oh, actually I didn't appreciate that because XYZ, and then the person's like, oh, I didn't mean this didn't really happen, you're taking it the wrong way, you're being oversensitive. Especially if you're young, you will internalize that and be like, oh, maybe I am being oversensitive, maybe I should just let this happen to me. But it's like, no, trust yourself. If something doesn't feel right, if you feel upset, you're allowed to vocalize that, and you're also allowed to say, you know, this is what I will allow. And like I was saying earlier in this talk, I don't think that the marginalized are put on this earth to educate the privileged. So I mean, if you want to do it and you have the capacity to do it, good on you. But like, I am not in the business of, you know, explaining to a white person why the N-word is offensive. Like, to me, that is basic. You should know that. It is going to be very traumatic for me to have to describe to you why that is a painful word. And if you do want to find out more about it, that is on you as a person who's like, okay, I've got privilege here, but I don't understand this experience. Let me use the internet, especially now when there's like a plethora of resources, be it the internet, be it physical ones, whatever. There are so many ways to access information. And a lot of the time people like to be like, oh, but like, you know, especially in this day and age, which is a phrase I hate, because there's always been resistance to bigotry. No one was ever living just being like, yeah, we're going to be fine with these systems, you know, like Black people is going to take enslavement lying down. Like, no, we know about like enslaved people, like revolts. We know about like abolitionists. So like, there's never an excuse to just say that. So that's something I would really encourage young people to do, that like, if you do feel a certain type of way about something and people just don't get it, you're allowed to say, this is not a space for me. Or if you are forced to be in that space for whatever reason, like say it's in like a working environment or in school or whatever, be like, okay, what boundaries am I going to put in place that make me feel more comfortable? Like, am I not going to have this person as a close friend? Maybe they'll just be someone in my class and I limit my communication, and whatever feels comfortable for you, but like making sure you have that. And also if you can find a good community of people to support you, whether that's like physically, like immediately with like friends or family, or like if you do find it through the internet, then do be careful on the internet, because like catfishes are around and some people also like to prey on children. But if you can find people who are actually your own agent in safe spaces, I think that's really important as well. And then yeah, as well, just like, again, like Eric was saying, just looking back and being like, what do I want to do? And definitely before you go and speak to the people, because I think sometimes, whether they mean it or not, they project their ideas onto you, but like really sit down with that and see what that means. And I think something that really helped me is like the phrase, like, you know, if you don't see it, be the person who like gets in it. Like when I was younger, like watching wrestling was awful, because like they used to have the people don't know what they call like a bra and panties match, which is like only for women, and they would literally win a match by like stripping the other woman to her underwear, and it was disgusting. It was awful. Like I remember being 4 years old and being like, why are the men's matches good but the women's match is bad? And obviously as I got older, I realized what was going on. But as well as that, not that that was okay, but it's like Black women were very rarely seen on those shows. And like as it wasn't until I was about 16 years old did I see a Black woman in a great position and actually being able to like showcase how great of a wrestler she is. And it wasn't until last year with WWE did 2 Black women main event WrestleMania. And it's like 2021, they've been having WrestleMania since the 80s. It took this long for Black women to main event. And did they kill it? Absolutely. We all knew they would. But like, just like, I think back to like young Black people now, like it's going to be so nice for children, like Black children, to see those 2 in that position. Like I didn't get to see that when I was their age, and I'm really happy they've had that. But like that's my mentality going into this field. Like what can I do to like inspire like young Black people and just show them that there's different ways of being? Because like I don't think people think Black person wrestler, but it's like, no, I am going to be a wrestler and I'm going to be a Black woman doing it, and like doing things to help other Black women in the field, or just other women, like other people of color and women in general. But like really don't limit yourself, like just because you can't see yourself there. And I know it's hard to be the first one, but someone's got to do it, and like it does pay off, even if it doesn't pay off for you in that like sphere. Like the women who were doing bra and panties matches, some of them never even got to have the matches that women are having today. But it's like if they didn't do those things, we wouldn't be in these positions. So like I'm eternally grateful to them. And the same thing happens with like, you know, like someone like Frederick Douglass, like he lives his life as an enslaved person. Thanks to his work, we don't have to live our lives that way. So I think just having that foresight as well, that even if it doesn't happen for you, it will happen in the future. So like keep persevering if you can. If the boundaries are like you need to take a break, take a break.
I think kind of like I think for me, like what I'd say to like young people, I think like it's super important to like seek out, especially in the age of the internet, like Eric was saying, to like seek out positive representation for yourself, because it does make things a lot easier. Because I know for me when I was younger, like I was like big into Tumblr and the whole like Tumblr era of things as like a teenager and stuff. And all the images I was seeing were of like, you know, like really thin, like white women. And I was like definitely going through my little like alt emo phase, as one would at like age 14. But I think like now, like if that is what you're into, like you can like seek out like Black people with those certain aesthetics, or you can seek out kind of like, if you want to be like a director, for example, I think it's super important to like seek out works by like Black women and stuff like that, because I think like it's so much easier to kind of like see yourself in like once you say like see yourself in that position, once you've seen someone else in that position as well. Because I know for me, like I think like when it came to like even like navigating like this space of film, like it took like I was kind of like when I was growing up, my mom would very like my mom realized very quickly like in Ireland there was only kind of like like an influx of like white media. So like she curated what I was watching very carefully. So I assumed like Cinderella was Black straight off the bat, and I assumed Whitney Houston was like the fairy godmother, and like that's all I knew. Like I was only ever watching like different strokes. Obviously it's good to like broaden your range and stuff, but like for me as a child, like I didn't have to like deal with kind of like this different like sense of like, oh, I don't see myself in like different areas of life, because my mom was very much like, oh no, I need to make sure Aisha sees herself as anything. And she like kind of implemented that in the media that I was like consuming and the media I was watching. But obviously as I got older and like interacted with like kind of other people within like the community, I was realizing I was like, what do you mean there's another Cinderella? And like, what do you mean she isn't Brandy? I was like, this isn't. So I think it is important to like kind of like seek out representation that really resonates with you. And like it can be like the smallest thing, because I know like for me, like growing up, I latched onto like the smallest thing. I think like there was one like Tyler the Creator lyric that was like, oh, like like black kid, I am paraphrasing awfully here. It was like, black kids do what you want, like you can dye your hair blue and stuff. And I was like, oh, amazing, I can be artsy now because Tyler the Creator told me I could dye my hair blue. And it's like just like small stuff like that that can really help you kind of like just get through and be like, okay, it's okay. And I don't want to like be like, oh, it's okay to be different or anything, because I think that's another thing of kind of like aligning your difference with kind of like whiteness and stuff, which I don't agree with. I don't know. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I'll be tussling with anyone who's like, oh my God, Aisha, why are you acting so white? We're tussling, we're fighting. But I think it's super important to kind of like find like Black representation, and like if you can't find it, then like once again, like Marsha was saying, like don't be afraid to be it for yourself. That is extremely intimidating and it can feel quite isolating. But like I know like for me, especially like down the line, that you will find your community, even if it isn't like in your exact like sphere. Because like at the moment, like I may not know like a lot of like Black female like Irish directors, or like Black like non-binary Irish directors or anything like that, but I do know like a lot of like Black like femme presenting people within the creative scene or like within the creative industry in Ireland. And that's like been really helpful, like to keep me going and to like in what I'm doing, and like to kind of like motivate me as well. And I think I think what's most important is to just take care of yourself and like take care of your mental health and to prioritize those things. Because I think like I don't think like that's talked about enough, like kind of like, because I like go through these like these like microaggressions and traumas just like in my 20s and stuff, like as a Black person. And I just remember how hard that was for me, like as a child and like as a teenager and stuff. But I was like fortunate enough that I had like access to therapy like fairly early on and stuff like that. But like not everyone has access to that. So I think like prioritizing like self-care as a young Black person is super important, because like we're going through it. We're going through it as much as like I'm like, oh yeah, Black joy, like Black, there's Black struggle, even if it's in someone being like, oh my God, like you look so ghetto today or something, or like saying like a throwaway comment like that and thinking it's endearing. It's just like, take time to take care of yourself and take time to like really like nurture yourself as a human being and nurture your mental health and nurture who you are as a person, and to like find yourself represented in different beautiful ways and not so beautiful ways, or whatever way you want to see yourself as. And just to not be afraid to like redefine yourself and define yourself as much as you want, because you are young and you have the space to hopefully do that now, with kind of like the way we're seeing more diversity and representation for Black people today.
Yeah, you were all amazingly inspiring. And Aisha, I love your mom. I'm what your mom does. I do that to my little brothers, where I remember their face when I brought them to see Black Panther. Amazing. And even now, and we're watching Captain America, and like now there's a Black Captain America. It really does make a difference for young kids to go in and like look at it differently. So yeah, that's amazing. So I'm aware of the time, but we have one question from an audience. So I'm just going to ask the question, and just if we can just keep it short, so then we're just finished on time. In considering how race is spatially constructed in actual everyday Irish spaces, so like work, home, shops, gym, streets, etc., and thinking about the work that us white Irish people need to do in acknowledging our whiteness and our stereotypes and endeavoring to be anti-racist, in what everyday spaces should white people do? Should white people be checking our stereotypes and assumptions?
In every space. Like, I know that sounds crazy, but it's literally like racism is so like indoctrinated in like every aspect of life. It's crazy. Like in every aspect of life, it's crazy. So I think like sometimes it can be as like a small thing as in like, I don't know, like, oh, I'm trying to think of like let's say like you go into like, I don't know, like one of the ethnic shops, and like you might make an off comment about like, oh, like it smells like awful in here. Like you might make an off comment about the food and stuff like that. It's kind of like dissect why your brain is thinking like that kind of thing. Or it might be a thing of like, oh, like, I don't know, like even like you have to ask yourself like what media do you consume, or like who do you follow on social media and stuff like that. Because like I know for me, like I remember like the other day I was telling my friend about like the term like Black boy joy, and like she hadn't heard about that. And that was insane to me, because I was like, I've been hearing that phrase for like years. Then I was like, oh, it's probably because you don't follow as many Black people as I would follow and stuff like that. And it's kind of like you kind of have to like really dice. And like it's crazy how racism is in like every aspect of life. Like if you like anytime like you see like the breakdown of things, it like, and it comes back to racism, and like it's like, wow, I'm not even surprised. So I definitely think like you have to examine it in every aspect of life. And I won't go into like deep specifics, but yeah, if especially like work life, home life, everything, like more than likely like stuff like that will come up in ways you don't expect. And like it can come down to just like doing the reading or like listening to like lived experiences and stuff like that. But I won't talk about that too much, because I think like the resources are out there, and like there's a lot of like platforms that are like dedicated to educating people on those things, so they can explain better than I ever could at this moment.
Yeah, I think it's about, like you said, believing Black people when they have these experiences. Like, if it's fair enough if this isn't your experience with a Black person saying this has happened and it's wrong, and you don't get to say, oh, but I didn't mean it, so I didn't, like, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, it's just cool. Okay, I'm going to accept them and take it on board. If they want to go into detail and tell you more to like help educate you, fine. But like I said, it's not on Black people to educate white people. Like, you need to go and do your own independent research, because like, again, I try and think about it in my terms of privilege. Like, for example, I watched a show called Pose, which if you're not familiar with, it's about like Black and Latina trans women in the 80s and 90s just doing in like ballroom culture and like living their lives. And there's a lot of references that I don't understand because I'm not a trans person. It is not, and I live as a non-binary person. It is not on me to go and speak to them and be like, so can you explain this term to me? I just look it up myself and try and educate myself that way. And then if we're discussing the show and it comes up and I learn more from their experience, great, but like it's not on them to do that. But also I would think about like how you change language when you speak to people. So for example, in like dating aspects, like my friends and I would all be like, I guess we'd all have skinny privilege, but it's like how I'll be on a dating app and someone will be like, oh, I bet you have a big ass. And it's like, that's just racist and fetishizing me as a Black woman, because you can see from my pictures that, and again, there's nothing wrong with being like a bigger person, but it's like, I know if I was white wearing the clothes that I wear and like being the size that I am, you would not be calling my butt big or like describing me in that way, but you are changing how you describe me because I'm a Black woman, and that is like misogynoir. So it's about like checking back on yourself and be like, why do I describe people of this race in this way, but I don't describe other races or the specific white race this way? And yeah, it's about doing it in every single aspect. Like if it means you're literally having an internal check all the time, have that radar, do it all the time, and like be critical of media as well. Like, you know, okay, I was watching this thing about a Black person and it was like a majority Black cast and they did this, but then I was watching this other thing and it was like majority white, but they had like one Black person there and then they did this. Why was that different? Like have the critical analysis when you're like in every situation. That's how I try and live my life, and I think it's been very helpful. So that would be my advice.
Very briefly, I'd separate my answer into acknowledging whiteness, because that's what was asked, but also acknowledging the bias that you might hold in any specific moment. So in regards to acknowledging whiteness, if you take an example, for instance, where there was a predominantly white space, and let's say one Black person, two Black people were in the minority, and you sensed a feeling of uneasiness, you sensed other white people in your presence, upholding stereotypes about those Black people. For example, a very brief example would be, this is not to do with race, it's more to do with sex, but a politician in a political party, I heard her at an event, and she said that she went to a political conference, that she was the only woman in the room. And when she tried to speak, she was being dismissed. She heard men sniggering when she tried to contribute to the conversation. And she also felt a condescension in the air because of the fact that she was a woman in a predominantly male space, which these men define as a space that's supposed to be predominantly male, because they see politics as the game of the man. If you're ever in a similar space in a racial context, and you see people in the minority there feeling uneasy about the fact that they're in the minority, and people in the majority amplifying that feeling of uneasiness. I think it's important to then acknowledge your whiteness and how that common denominator is shared by the majority and how that might impact the experiences of those in the minority. I think this is basic empathy that should be embraced in said scenarios. And the second point, my last point, is about bias. I think it's so important for us to acknowledge the fact that we're all deeply biased. And I think one of the problems in intellectual discourse that I see right now is a pushback when it comes to the idea that one can possess a modicum, even a modicum of bias. You know, we're all biased as human beings, and there's cognitive reasons for this. So I think in the case of race, it's so important to acknowledge any thought that might pass through your mind about someone else who you interact with, who might be Black, who might be an ethnic minority, and just check it and be a deep and thorough skeptic in regards to your thoughts. Why do I think in this way? How might I have been conditioned to think in this way? Acknowledge the fact that you are thinking in this way, then proceed to try and ensure that you don't embrace such thoughts into the future. So this is what I'd say in regards to acknowledging whiteness and also in terms of checking one's bias.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that conversation. Like, oh, my mind is blown, and there's so many different ideas I have, but I really hope that the audience has enjoyed it, because I like the three there, like, you're definitely change makers. And as I said, Eric is going to be our Taoiseach. I have said it here, we've named it. We'll look back in the history books and we'll be able to see that. So thank you so much for the Douglas team for giving us the space to just chat and just rant out about our frustrations, but also really hopefully inspire people to, as everyone has said, that if you can't see it, be it. And even if you're not the first one to make that change, it is going to happen. And I would never have thought a few years back that there'll be I'll be in a panel just with Black people just talking about these conversations freely. So thank you so much for the Douglas team.